Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into some complex sources you've shared, looking at everything from workplace equity, digital privacy challenges, all the way to the very difficult subject of international conflict.
It's quite a range.
It really is. And our goal here is to kind of unpack all this, pull out the key insights, and basically give you a shortcut to being genuinely informed on some pretty major issues happening right now.
Absolutely. And, navigating this kind of material really does require a careful approach. It's crucial to see the different angles, the multiple perspectives, and the legal stuff underpinning it all.
Okay, so let's start with the workplace. The sources paint a picture of 2023 as, well, a really tough year for talent acquisition, lots of layoffs, budget cuts.
A year many wanted to forget, I imagine.
Exactly. But alongside the economic pressures, there was this big legal development, the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action, but specifically in higher education.
Right. Students for Fair Admissions v. Harvard.
Yes. And even though that ruling wasn't directly about jobs, it seems it cast a real shadow over corporate DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs.
It absolutely did. Confusion, concern.
Yeah.
Those are the immediate reactions in the corporate world. And you have to remember the economic context, high interest rates, companies tightening belts, DEI programs, which had been quite prominent, suddenly look, well, vulnerable.
Right, maybe seen as cost centers in some places. But interestingly, the research we looked at also points towards something called hiring equity as a potential way forward, a sort of North Star for TA teams. It's presented as not just legally safer, but also efficient. The idea seems to be focusing on fair processes themselves.
Like what, for example?
Well, things like anonymizing resumes during initial screening or using really standardized interview questions for everyone. The argument is this organically boosts diversity without relying on specific targets or quotas, and it works even if resources are tight.
That makes sense. It shifts the focus from, let's say, outcomes to the process itself, which is generally much more legally defensible, especially now.
And speaking of the legal side, this is really timely. There's a major Supreme Court decision mentioned in the sources that actually came down today, June 27th. It deals with reverse discrimination. What's the gist of that?
Okay, yes, this is significant. This ruling tackles reverse discrimination claims under Title VII, the main federal anti-discrimination law. What the court did today was invalidate the background circumstances rule.
Okay, what was that rule?
Previously, if a non-minority person filed a discrimination suit, they often had to show these extra background circumstances, suggesting their employer was unusual in that they discriminated against the majority group. It was an additional hurdle.
So that hurdle is gone now, making it easier to file such suits.
Essentially, yes. It puts those claims on the same initial footing as others under Title VII.
Wow. And how are, say, government agencies reacting? The sources mentioned the EEOC.
Right, the acting EEOC chair, Andrea Lucas, reportedly welcomed the decision quite strongly. She specifically pointed to language in a concurring opinion, suggesting that some DEI programs could, potentially, result in discrimination against majority employees. And this comes not long after the EEOC and the Department of Justice put out technical guidance back in March 2025, clarifying what might be seen as discriminatory in federal agency DEI efforts. So the signals are pretty clear. The ground is definitely shifting for corporate DEI.
It really seems like it. It raises big questions for you listening. How will businesses adapt their approach to diversity and inclusion now? Definitely something to keep an eye on. Okay, let's shift gears from the workplace to our online lives. Because similar tensions around fairness, access, and regulation were definitely playing out there too. We're seeing this explosion of age verification laws popping up everywhere, North America, Europe, Australia.
Yeah, it's a real trend.
All aimed at keeping kids and teens away from certain online content.
But here's the major catch, the core privacy issue. To verify age, you first have to identify the user, every single one.
Which means collecting sensitive data.
Exactly. We're talking facial scans, copies of government IDs, collected by platforms or often by third-party companies. And crucially, there's often very little oversight on how they protect this data.
It sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. A honeypot for hackers, as one source put it.
Precisely. It's an enormous trove of sensitive data, and the risk of leaks is incredibly high. And it's not just theoretical, these kinds of breaches have already happened. The more copies of your ID floating around online, the higher the chance of exposure, and frankly, the less secure that ID becomes when you actually need it for something important.
That's a serious point. Now, internationally, we see things like the EU's mini wallet app for age verification, but groups like EDR and the EFF are raising red flags, aren't they?
They absolutely are. They're warning about, well, the obvious privacy threats, data protection failures, but also a potential chilling effect.
Meaning people might just avoid certain websites altogether.
Right, self-censorship,
Hmm.
or just being denied access to perfectly legal information. They also worry about digital exclusion. What about people who don't have easy access to official IDs? And then there's the risk of scope creep.
Meaning it starts with porn sites, but then expands.
Could be social media, news sites, anything deemed potentially harmful. It's a slippery slope argument.
And how's this playing out legally in the U.S.?
Well, the EFF has been fighting these mandates hard. And interestingly, federal courts in several states, Ohio, Indiana, Utah, and Mississippi, have actually struck down these child safety laws pretty consistently. They've upheld First Amendment rights, basically saying these laws unconstitutionally restrict access to speech online.
Which makes today's other Supreme Court ruling even more interesting. Also June 27th, 2025. A 6-3 decision that seems to clear the path for more age verification, specifically for porn sites.
Yes, and the key here is the legal standard they used. Instead of strict scrutiny, which usually applies when First Amendment rights are involved, the majority applied a lower standard called rational basis to the Texas law they were reviewing.
And what does that mean, practically?
It means the state doesn't have to show as compelling a reason for the law or that it's narrowly tailored. Justice Kagan, in her dissent, really hammered this point. She argued the majority basically created an unprincipled pornography exception to the First Amendment.
An exception just for porn.
That's her argument. And her worry is profound. She suggests this ruling gives states a kind of playbook. If they decide any online speech is harmful to minors, maybe political views they dislike, or news coverage or social media debates, they can now potentially burden or restrict access to it using this lower legal bar.
That really broadens the potential impact, doesn't it? It forces you to think about this balance, online safety versus our fundamental rights to privacy and free expression. How will this continue to shape our digital world? Okay, for our final segment, we're turning to an issue that requires immense care and sensitivity, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We need to be very clear we're exploring the diverse perspectives and the complex legal arguments presented in the sources you shared, aiming for strict impartiality throughout.
It's essential, given the nature of the topic.
So let's start with some historical context provided. One source points to the 1929 Hebron massacre as a really seminal event, happening long before Israel's statehood or the occupation. It describes the killing of Jewish residents by Arab neighbors and suggests understanding this is key to grasping the conflict's deep roots, seeing echoes even in the October 7th attacks.
History casts a long shadow here.
Indeed. We also see mentions of the 1948 war, the Palestinian experience of displacement known as the Nakba, and the idea that Palestinian national identity really formed around that event. The sources present conflicting reasons for failed negotiations over the years. Some cite Palestinian refusal to accept a Jewish state, others frame it differently, arguing Arabs colonized the region and Israel represents decolonization.
Very different narratives.
Very. And another view emphasizes Jewish survival necessitating a state, while Arabs, from their perspective, felt no need to share the land. It's complex. Now, central to recent discussions are allegations of genocide. How is genocide actually defined in legal terms?
Okay, this is crucial. Under international law, specifically, the 1948 Genocide Convention and the later 1998 Rome Statute genocide stands apart. It requires proving a specific intent, the mens rea, to destroy, in whole or in part, a specific group, national, ethnic, racial, or religious.
So it's not just about mass killing.
Not solely, no. The prohibited acts include killing, of course, but also things like deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the group's physical destruction, preventing births within the group, or causing serious bodily or mental harm. The intent is the key differentiator.
Understood. So applying that, what specific accusations of genocide in Gaza are detailed in the sources, particularly since October 7th, 2023?
The sources cite numerous allegations from groups like Amnesty International and various UN experts. These include claims of excessive force, including attacks on protected sites like schools and hospitals, reports of theft and desecration of the dead, and a failure to adequately distinguish between Hamas fighters and civilians.
There's also mention of cultural sites.
Yes, targeting cultural and educational institutions, with reports of nearly 1,000 mosques damaged or destroyed. The alleged use of white phosphorus is also mentioned in some reports cited.
And beyond direct attacks, what about conditions of life?
That's another major area. The sources discuss the long-standing blockade of Gaza since 2007 and the severe restrictions on essential supplies like food, water, and medicine since the latest hostilities began. This has led the UN to warn of imminent famine.
And this links to the ICC.
Correct. The International Criminal Court prosecutor specifically included the use of starvation as a method of warfare, which is a war crime under the Rome Statute, in the charges filed against Israeli officials.
And one more specific point mentioned was reproductive centers.
Yes, the destruction of IVF embryos and facilities.
Yeah.
UN experts cited in the material have condemned these acts, labeling them as potentially genocidal acts because they impact the group's ability to reproduce.
Now, the crucial element you mentioned is intent, the mens rea. What evidence or arguments regarding intent do the sources present?
This is where it gets highly contentious, often focusing on statements made by Israeli officials.
Hmm.
The sources point to examples like Prime Minister Netanyahu vowing to exact a huge price and turn Hamas hideouts into rubble.
And the reference to Amalek.
Yes, his repeated invocation of Amalek, a biblical enemy the ancient Israelites were commanded to annihilate, is highlighted by critics, including South Africa in its ICJ case, as potential evidence of genocidal intent. Other cited statements include an official Israeli social media post saying there are no innocent civilians there, and comments by politician Moshe Feiglin in May 2025 that every child, every baby in Gaza is an enemy.
Quite extreme statements.
Extremely. Comparisons made by Economy Minister Nir Barkat to the bombing of Dresden and an Israeli army spokesperson focusing on actions that cause maximum damage are also noted. Some scholars interpret this pattern of rhetoric as indicating intent, while others argue it doesn't meet the high legal threshold for proving specific intent to destroy the group as such.
It's clearly a point of major legal debate. How have international bodies and other countries reacted legally and politically?
Well, as mentioned, the ICC prosecutor applied for arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity in May 2024, and those warrants were issued in November 2024. It's important to note, though, that genocide itself wasn't listed in those specific charges, though some acts overlap.
Okay.
We also see sources mentioning hundreds of lawyers and academics warning the UK government about potential complicity in genocide if it continues arms sales to Israel. And then there's Germany's stance, where accusing Israel of genocide is reportedly viewed as anti-Semitic, sometimes leading to arrests, even for Jewish or Israeli individuals making the claim. Nicaragua actually sued Germany at the ICJ over alleged complicity.
So, multiple layers of legal action and political positioning.
And underlying all this, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, has consistently stated that the core principles of the Genocide Convention are binding on all states, whether they ratify the treaty or not. It's considered customary international law. This includes the duty to prevent and punish genocide.
It's an incredibly complex and deeply charged situation. We really encourage you, our listeners, to explore these different legal arguments and historical perspectives further to develop your own informed understanding. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've certainly covered a lot of ground, from the evolving landscape of DEI in the workplace and the critical debates around digital privacy and free speech, right through to the profound legal and human complexities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
It's a lot, definitely. But seeing how these issues connect law, technology, human rights, international relations, it really underscores why engaging with diverse, sometimes difficult sources is so important for understanding the world we're in.
Couldn't agree more. So, reflecting on everything we've discussed today, the rapid shifts in law, tech, and geopolitics, we want to leave you with a final thought to consider. As a society, what are the most vital safeguards we need to build or strengthen to protect fundamental human rights and ensure real accountability across all these different areas? What strikes you as the biggest challenge or perhaps the biggest opportunity as we move forward?